to be here to contribute to this technological innovation you got going in this island. And I think it's going well so far. We live in the Silicon Valley, in Europe's tech capital. Some people say Berlin is going to be. And usually every day in Berlin we have multiple events like this, and people are streaming in and trying to make something they call Silicon Alley. But in Berlin we have many long alleys, and it's going rather well. And I was involved in the global hackerspace community and the maker culture, which kind of came out of it. The hackerspace is kind of the precursor to co-working spaces, some people say. And I usually compare it, it's a mix of a hippie commune, where people live together and try to make a new society experiment. So a mix of a hippie commune, a mix of the coffee houses of the Renaissance, where the gentlemen and gentlewomen meet, have coffee or other stimulating substances, and talk about new ideas for society to move on. And very important in the hackerspaces, it's also many people consider it to be the education institute of the future. So it's at hackerspaces there are a lot of knowledgeable people, and it's not sometimes. People are encouraged to do the workshops. But often it happens on horizontal knowledge transfer. So somebody comes in and says, okay, I want to build this robot and I have no idea how to go about it. I get a few lights here and I step a motor and it's going to be this great robot. And then, usually some other people come up and say, why don't you try this way, or you consider using this technology, or that's really great. And then this way great projects happen. And basically people, at least in hackerspaces, it's slightly more anarchistic and slightly more, we call it a do-ocracy. So you're not supposed to ask anyone for permission, can I set up here, or can I build robots, or quantum laser, zero-point energy modules. You just kind of go ahead and do it, communicating with other people in the space. And if there's a problem, then people will approach you. If there's multiple people, eventually we can have a group meeting and talk about stuff. But the concept of duocracy is very, very important for stimulating stuff. You just go ahead and do things. You don't like, oh, can I do this, and who do I have to ask? Kind of start doing stuff, even though you might not be qualified, and other people will jump in and try to help you. So, from my experience, I really think it's good going your experiment here and with the hub and with the Maker Fair and the city to the east. And so I've been a fan of sci-fi and science and technology, hardcore geek and nerd, basically all my life, always wondering about invisible magic forces like electromagnetism. And I was lucky enough to have a dad who was a science teacher and engineer, and I could ask him all the questions and he appeared to know everything, was quite eloquent talking about it. And eventually, for 8 years or so, I got this magic machine that was able to be reconfigured, gave you stimulating visuals, and you could change something, like type something, hack something in, and then it would make sounds. And I remember my first program with 7 years or something was a sound program. I discovered this, you could say, generate tone and put in a number, and the number could be higher or lower, and later I found out it's a frequency. And my dad told me to try 440 hertz, and I tried to make a piano, and so it was quite a technical experience with 7 years or something, trying to make a synthesizer. And so I later got into AI and artificial intelligence, and always wondered about those things, and futurism. So already as a small boy, I envisioned a brain-computer interface. I thought maybe you can control technology directly with your mind. Of course, it was, as a child, a little bit crazy. But then studied 10 years all of science that's related to consciousness, so physics, computer science, philosophy, biology, astrophysics, and later first science, and then later I got into philosophy and meditation. To put the science into perspective, I think it's can be dangerous if you only do science. It can lead to nuclear weapons and kind of powerful technology looking into matter very closely and reigning over it. So I can recommend doing some philosophy and meditation to reflect on the greater picture. Well, then eventually I thought about many years, what is the most awesomest, craziest thing that's still kind of doable? And I came up with OpenBCI. So it's been working on it for 10 years. It's an open source brain-computer interface. And the technology of it is really simple. For 70 years, medical people have been engaged into this electrical measuring of signals, biological signals. So it's not esoteric, crazy science as sometimes it appears to people. It's simply EMG, ECG, and EEG, and that means electromyogram. That's if your muscle, if you sense electrical activity to your muscle to tense, it generates a relatively strong signal when the muscles tense because of those muscles, they go collectively like this, and you get a strong current that you can measure the EMG, or you can also apply force to it. I think 100 years ago they did it with toed legs and they would twitch. And so basically this is the line where people are applying electromagnetism to living beings. And then there's ECG, that's heart rate measuring, very standard in medical science. And then EEG also has been practiced for almost 100 years. And of the new ideas, 10 years ago at least, I came up with this use very advanced machine learning and data mining algorithms to analyze the EEG, because in psychology class or in medical class, medical university, they usually tell the students, look at the EEG signal, and after many years at the raw signal. And after many years you will kind of get a feeling about it, and you will be able to tell, okay, this is autistic, he has sleeping disorders, and just looking at the raw signal. And that might be true after many years, but I also immediately thought, hey, you can use frequency filters, you can use Fourier transform, you can use wavelet transform, because I was familiar with this AI stuff. I'm trying to find patterns in nature. So you can have like n-dimensional, 20-dimensional data, and then you can use like clustering algorithms, simulate like a universe where every data point is a star, and you simulate gravity and you push the stars apart, kind of like what supposedly happens in the universe, and you end up with this expanding universe where there's a distance between each star. Stars are data points, and then you can say the distance metric tells me how similar those star systems are, and I end up with star clusters basically, and they are brainwave patterns that are similar. So this way you can, I guess I get to it later on. So the most basic science about brainwaves is the separation in different frequency bands. The lower to the higher frequencies, there's delta waves, theta waves, alpha and beta waves. And it used to be that science thought there is nothing beyond beta. Beta is kind of when the brain is actively working. Alpha is beginning relaxation. Theta is deep relaxation or meditation. And delta is the deep sleep phase. So sleep usually has delta and theta waves, depending if you're completely in the dead sleep phase or if you're the REM phase, it's more active. But recently, it's always the scientists sometimes can become arrogant and think they know everything. The same thing happened with the junk DNA. It used to be believed that there's a large quantity of the DNA that humans don't know what it's exactly for. So scientists used to say it's junk DNA. It's from our past, and it has no function, it's just left over. But recently it was discovered it's actually epigenetics. So this junk DNA is basically the program flow. So the DNA is basically like a library. You have all those functions, encoding proteins that are basically chemical programs, like taking substance A, making substance B. And the DNA, if you read it linearly, is just a library with different functions. And what really is governing the life is the epigenetics. Certain areas in the DNA which used to be, people think it was junk DNA, they have jump orders. So they tell the ribosome, go here again. If you have this molecule, lactose, then jump here. So it's really sometimes things happen. The same happens with brainwaves. because at 50 Hertz we have the power supply, or 50 or 60 Hertz depending on the hemisphere, you have a lot of power supplies everywhere, and so you get a lot of radiation that is a problem for EEG measurement, because with my hardware I'm amplifying 1,000 to 10,000 times whatever is here at the front gets amplified 10,000 times. So, for example, if there's not a good contact, the whole thing acts like an antenna and is receiving everything around and amplifying it lots of times. And so even a small power supply with some weight around will make a very strong noise signal in the 50 Hertz region. So that's why brain scientists, it was technically very hard to measure beyond 50 Hertz because of this noise. So they said there is no brain activity beyond 50 Hertz. But recently, really at universities, they found out the human brain sometimes can go up to 200 Hertz. So, but that happens very rarely, and it's only when the brain is like reshaping itself. Then the theory is the brain is really hardcore rewiring neurons and really being challenged. So now there's a new kind of brain wave, the so-called gamma wave, or even the so-called high gamma wave. We can measure also this. Then there's another technology that can be used to affect with machines the brain. Can be in both directions. That's why I should say brain-machine interface can affect the mind with the machines, and the other way around. So the mind can control the machines. That's one technology from the machines to influence the mind. It's binaural beats. You have two speakers, and you generate almost the same frequency. For example, in this example, you send to the left ear 220 Hertz and to the right ear 226, and then you have a difference of 6 Hertz, and then what happens is it's almost the same tone, but the slight difference, the brain just perceives internally the difference between those two noises, two sounds. So the brain will in this case, get a stimulation of 6.5 Hertz, which is the difference. And you basically almost the same tone, but in your mind, there's this illusion being constructed that you're actually hearing the difference, 6 Hertz or 11 Hertz. And this can be a slight stimulation to the brain, as you can see in this graphic. What you hear on the left is processed on the right side and vice versa. So the signals, if you let it go through your mind, it really goes through your brain and makes your brain pulsate in this frequency. The effect is not so strong if you just send stuff and don't change what you're sending depending on the brain activity. So what I have been fascinated with is measuring in real time the brain activity and adjusting the binaural beats to that. So most binaural beats just send you a predefined program for half an hour, and whatever your brain is following or not, they just keep sending. But if you're measuring in real time if the brain is reacting and how adjusting your stimuli to it can be more effective. And then there's strobe lights. You can do the same thing, like have a light with 6 or 11 Hertz basic relaxation. And nowadays there are many apps. You simply have something like this, hold it in front of your face and close your eyes, important. And then you get this blinking motion. And whenever you change the frequency, it's something that the brain is not used to. You get intense hallucinations when you change the frequency. And this can also have, if used in combination with binaural beats, like you send 11 Hertz binaural beats, and send the light at the same frequency. If you get epilepsy, better not try it. But it can have a stimulating effect. And then usually you start at 11 Hertz to get into a basic relaxation for 5 minutes, and then slowly go down on the frequency, and then you can have beta spikes. I'll get to that later. That can make hallucinations because you're sending something to the brain that the brain is not used to. So the brain is trying to find patterns out everywhere, everything, all the time. The brain is a pattern finding machine. So it's nice to send chaotic signals because the brain then starts projecting, visualizing, and all kinds of stuff. And you usually see fractals and kaleidoscoping. And of course the hippies already got into that. They didn't have this technology like the smartphone I just showed you. They simply took a turntable and put cardboard on it with various holes and spun the turntable at a certain frequency. And then depending on the height, that's what you can see with this, let's use this fancy laser point. That's what you can see with this woman here. If you go up or down, you will get different frequencies. And I basically believe myself also in the tradition of the early shamans. If you had something to eat, if you had cuddling action, you can look into the stars. That became more the scientists. And then the other guys, after having met all their things they need, they kept looking into the fire. And the fire also has this thing, flickers around in almost random frequencies. And I would say the beginning of human culture. After you had enough to eat and it was warm, some people looked to the sky, starting science, and some people looked into the fire, starting meditation or shamanism. So I believe it's similar like a shaman. If they drum in a certain rhythm with their drums and look into the fire, they also can have this effect on their consciousness. And yeah, nowadays you can do it with very advanced technological things. You can have those lasers they have in the dance clubs nowadays, very precise. You can control them with DMX software and make crazy patterns, and that's something really fascinating. If you make, I have this wireless headset, and you can give them around in the audience, and then the environment, like in this such a club environment, you can change the lights and the colors, depending, like it can be pulsating from red to blue, depending on the frequency of the few people who wear such headsets. And this is a very, people call it immersive experience. You know, you're standing somewhere having a conversation, and the environment is kind of pulsating according to your heart or brain waves slightly and changing when you have a new idea. Suddenly the light becomes more blue. If you chill down and becomes more red, for example.
So going to the right is basically mind hacking.
Mind hacking, yeah. That's what I call it, because I come from the hacking background, which is not breaking into other people's systems. It's creatively applying new ideas. And what I think is most important about hacking is not accepting authority and looking behind the screen, like in Matrix. Try to see the code behind the reality and mess around with it. So my first hacking thing was sniff packets, and you go to www.google.com. You sniff what's actually being sent over the Wi-Fi interface or over the DNC connection I used back in the day, and you see all those packets and those handshakes. And it used to be, once you look behind the screen, you see what happens when you open a URL or when you send an email. That's a classic. You can do things manually, and then usually there used to be no security in the internet. So I can send still today to every one of you, send an email from Bill Gates or Steve Jobs at apple.com. You can just in the sender field of any email, you can just put any string, any information. But usually your user interface will give you an error. But if you do it with manual terminal commands, you can. So that's what I mean by hacking: looking behind the obvious, trying to find laws behind the reality, and on the lower level, messing with that stuff and creatively. So it's about trying something new, like using things for another purpose. And it's being supposed to be separated from cracking. Cracking, that's what when you hack into another system and mess around with it. We from the Chaos Computer Club, we teach our younglings, our Padawans always, you can hack into other systems but never delete, never change anything, never mess with stuff, just inform the people about their insecurity.
Was that you, Paul?
Maybe. So that's one of my first experiments 10 years ago. I built those classes with a microcontroller, and I could reprogram the microcontroller from my notebook machine to make those LEDs here. Different colors blink in various frequencies, and later I managed to directly control it through USB. But nowadays we have the apps. So then it also follows a little bit the tradition of Mitch Altman. This is a guy traveling all over the world teaching soldering to children. And he really inspires me because he goes to Africa, he goes to Asia, really developing countries. It's easy for me to come here, stay at a hotel, and now talk about this. He goes to Africa, Asia, sleeps on the desert, and teaches the children in Africa how to build electronics from scrap metal. And that really inspired me. And he also made this similar technology, this mind machine. He sells a kit for maybe $10, and you can build this glasses to blink. And but I wanted to improve it, so I made a visual GUI for it, so you can design this experiences. And you can see the beginning of my experiment was basic meditation, brainwave flexibility, sleep induction. You can design those things like start at 15 Hertz and slowly go down. This was supposed to be for brainwave flexibility, so I basically bombard the brain with all kinds of alternating frequencies and try to widen the frequency, the flexibility of the brain. So most people I measured over 1,000 people, they're in some frequency mental state, and maybe they can change to another state. Usually it's 2 or 3 states, and they're locked in it. And then processing their reality, they get information. They have those 2 or 3 different states they can change between and kind of process, make their neural net oscillate depending on the stimuli, and then react to it based on 2 or 3 different states. So, but the brain has millions of possible states. So with my technology, I try to just look at the visuals and relax and maybe play a game. And basically, technology stimulates your brain, if you want to have more different, many different frequency states you can go into, and widen the range of frequencies your brain can really move in. So it kind of gives you the ability, your brain has more frequencies available if it wants to go there, and then it's a massive change for your perception and for intelligence and for creativity, because you suddenly have like a lot more frequencies and a lot more possible potential brainwave states your brain can go into, depending on your stimuli, and reproduce completely new inputs. And I claim that I can improve your intelligence and creativity just by looking at the visuals on the screen.
But you said you can improve creativity and intelligence.
I can improve the IQ, so I can do Sudoku or Mahjong, certain games for brain training. What I've been doing is playing these games, measuring the high score, then looking at the visuals and wearing the headset for half an hour, like a scientist, making a training session, doing nothing, just relaxing and letting my brain drift a little bit. But of course the system would stimulate me whenever my brain would go to a new frequency. Usually the brain oscillates a little bit, keeps their state, but goes a little bit up or down all the time, like a little bit fluctuating. So whenever it fluctuates in an upwards direction, I can make a nice sound or beautiful images, like a fireworks that becomes more colorful, and the brain just wow, and it goes more into whatever happened at this time. So I can say, okay, sometimes reward the brain when it's going up, sometimes reward when it's going down, whatever, but it's doing something new. And when it's doing something new, I'm rewarding the brain, so it learns subconsciously and does it more. Sometimes, and then just after doing this training for 20 minutes, I play the IQ game again. And at least in my case, I measured 20 to 30% improvement per week or something. As long as I would do it, the higher score would be. Of course, you can challenge it if you play the same mental game. You have a learning effect anyway. So I'm no longer claiming it's science. I'm saying it's art. It can be nice for myself, for other people. I'm not claiming it does anything to you, so I don't get all this offense from scientists and you're measuring noise or. Of course, I didn't do that many double blind studies. I'm supposed to do double blind studies, so show people visuals that are not actually related to their brainwaves, but tell them they are, and I'm unaware if it's real visuals or not myself. And then see, you will still have the placebo effect. People, I went to Psytrance, Goa, psychedelic events, and measured their brainwaves, and there are many people believe to change see all kinds of lines moving everywhere. And,
how long lasting is the effect of increasing their intelligence? You stimulate them with the lights and the light.
Mm-hmm. Then the brain is kind of a little bit more open, a little bit more flexible, and that helps you in problem solving, of course.
Is it a long-term effect? Can you make it? You haven't tested it, but is it like
I've only tested it on myself, and I used to be really shy and really.
No, I think you mean, does it reverse?
Yeah, does it go back?
In a
Is
period
it like
of time.
elastic, or does it go back?
So,
does it grow?
I think there's a long-lasting effect. But of course, if you do it only once, it will be only a little bit and then go back. The brain always has inertia. Everywhere in the world, in the universe, there's inertia. It always goes back to its previous state. If you push somebody, they will come back. But there are scientists, this is called neurofeedback, and nowadays it's quite well understood in science. So they treat autism, depression, and HDD children with this neurofeedback protocols. And I can refer to a study from the University of Tübingen, that's in South Germany. And what they did a double-blind study with chronic pain patients. And they were able to show that it's lasting, because there were people who had imaginary pain. So you think your leg hurts, but even though there's nothing wrong, but you still have strong pain somewhere in your body, it can be something messed up in your brain. And what they did just rewarded the people because their pain perception center had lower frequency. I can reward you if any part of your brain has more activity, or I can reward you whenever any part of your brain has less activity. So what they rewarded people whenever their pain perception area had less activity. And so what they did was 4 times 50 minutes, and the average human was then able to perceive 90% less pain. And basically what happens is, using this neurofeedback technology, it helps your brain to self-regulate. So that means I can willfully say, okay, I'm going to relax now. And that's one, usually if you do meditation or yoga, it takes you a lot of years to consciously relax. Usually I'm going to relax now, it's not working like this. But usually you need many years of breathing and body exercise and yoga to achieve this. But now you can do the neurofeedback. And so there is a university, a scientific study, many now, that show if you do 4 times 50 minutes repetitively in 1 week, people simply learn this ability to change their brain willfully. So then these chronic pain patients can say, okay, I'm feeling this pain, but I'm not going to feel pain. And then because they learn, because of the feedback, I can try different things, not feeling pain, try different things. And whenever the system tells me, okay, now your pain perception center is really less activity, shows me a nice fire, this is so much better than just sitting in a cave for 20 years and it can work, but you have no feedback. Those people usually have a master and guru. And
so is there a potentially it could be very dangerous because it's manipulating the feedback.
Yes.
And you could manipulate the feedback to do good, or you could manipulate the feedback to do bad.
Yes, of course. It's like nuclear technology. It's like biotechnology, one of those emerging technologies. Nanotechnology, biotechnology, and neuroscience. It's like nuclear energy of the 21st century. You can massively mess up. And of course, people use it, unfortunately, for things called neuromarketing. So they put the headsets on people and sit them in front of the TV, and then they measure if the product is flying from the left corner or from the right corner, where does the pleasure center get stimulated most. And people do biological data mining, so they're mining the human brain for various purposes, the military. So there's danger also. My first experiment ever, I was trying it, from the mystical traditions. They always say, focus on your third eye and, open yourself up in cosmic frequencies. And what I simply understood was, in neuroscience terms, you have the corpus callosum, that's a connection between the connection between the right hemisphere and the left hemisphere in your brain. And you have many connections between those hemispheres, and it's right at the center of your brain. And that's where certain yogis or Buddhists tell you to focus your awareness in the center of your brain and relax. And what then happens is the blood flow gets increased, and there will be more neurons growing in this area, and that really, really connects your hemispheres. And I try to reward for that. So whenever you have a similar activity in left and right cortex, then you would get a reward, and that would make your brain no longer function as different parts, but make it function as a whole, pulsating, rhythmically, more rhythmically. And in neural net theory, when you have two things oscillating, not in resonance, they are separate. That's what they used to think, the left and right brain. But if you make them pulsate in one frequency, those neurons can have a new kind of relation. So every neuron can have up to 20 potential connections, nowadays. But in the usual human brain, every neuron, on average, only has 2 connections. So that means without increasing the number of neurons, we can simply increase the connectivity of the neurons. And if it has 2 connections and every neuron has 20 connections, it's like exponential, dimensional, so much more holographic information we all potentially can do. So your IQ, your creativity, IQ is kind of easy, I think. You can train for IQ also. But then I think the cool thing is I can stimulate creativity. And it's hard kind of to test for it. So I think I just move on.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Because you have people as they're growing older with things like if your brain activity starts to slow down, you have higher tendency to get Alzheimer's, dementia. Can you use some techniques like this to change that? How can they be used?
Well, I recommend for Alzheimer you have the myelin isolation in the neurons. I recommend certain diet. And of course, using the brain helps. And I think the consciousness in the brain works as a hologram. So, for example, if you take away some information from a hologram, the basic structure of the hologram still keeps intact, but it becomes less precise. And eventually, if you pull out more things, like in 2001, when this guy pulls out the memory modules of his Apple computer, what are you doing? You pull out those things, and your consciousness slowly starts to degrade. And if you have the right diet, I'm also in the transhumanist area and aging research, and I believe you can avoid it if you have the right diet. Your isolation all around the neurons doesn't disappear. And then, of course, if you regularly make your brain pulsate as a whole, it supports this whatever holographic structure, because consciousness is living in the neural net. There are many possibilities. I believe, neuroscience, biological science, we're reaching a golden age within our lifetimes, where at least the rich people or people who know how to do it can have no disease and live very long. For me, it's about giving this to every human. So I later can show you in a workshop how to build a neural headset for €5. Just something you can do in Africa or in Asia. And this technology is just beginning. I'm one of the pioneers, but I think it will be commonplace. In a decade or so, you regularly said to your children, if you want, the hippies, don't like any technology, but if you want, you can set your children in front of a light therapy thing, pulsating rhythmically with various organic LED things, and it will simply make that you are more intelligent, more creative, when you just bathe in this light therapy every morning if you want, and as a child you develop more intelligence, and you will not get mental sickness. And I even can treat depression, because depression, there's a biochemical reason for it. The brain is in a circuit, and it cannot break out of it biochemically. If you have certain chemicals, and you cannot just will yourself out of it. Sometimes it's a devil circle, we say in German, or it's a circle of it. I guess you know the correct word.
Vicious circle.
Vicious circle. And in this way, you usually take chemicals to break out of this circle, or you do a positive reward whenever the circle gets less strong. So it's a beginning of neurotherapy, and there are many applications for it. But I usually do art. I like to make sound with this technology. I can do real-time MIDI signals from the brain. I analyze the brain with different machine learning algorithms. Getting ahead of myself, that's how the visuals look like. In my early prototype, now 5 years old, and that's the visual representation of the program flow. So goes through all kinds of filters and formulas and tries to determine certain frequencies, and that's how the machine learning works. You have things like wavelet transformation, Fourier transforms, all the things they use in AI research and then data mining clustering. The coolest thing is, I know dynamic time warping. You express your 20-dimensional, like I have 20 electrodes, so every electrode is sending a signal. It's called a high-dimensional problem. It's not possible to visualize it. 20 dimensions, we have no idea, but you can do the clustering and then look from it from the best possible perspective from this universe with clustered stars, and then send gamma rays or something and make a shadow of it, and then you get a 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional representation of this n-dimensional thing. We call it topologically preserving projections, and then eventually we end up with a 3-dimensional landscape with mountains and rivers, and then what you can do is fly through this landscape, or dynamic time warping is this algorithm. You express your high-dimensional problem in a 3-dimensional landscape, pour water onto it, and see where the water flows and where the rivers develop. And then you know the shortest way through this data, and you found this thing I really like, data bionics. It's similar to bioinformatics, but it's the other way around. So it's computer scientists learning from nature. You look at the algorithms of evolution, so it's a really audacious thing to do, but I really like it. Try to understand evolution, how is life doing this? Like DNA is so beautiful. It's a redundant, self-preserving, almost perfect replicating data storage. There's no better known data storage. We have the SSDs, they're nice, or crystalline memory. Some people experiment with crystalline laser memory, but DNA is just beautiful. It has a CRC checksum. It's self-repairing. In just one small glass of DNA, you can have zettabytes, terabytes of data. And DNA computing is really cool. You can do nanobionics, like I can write a program in C++ or Java or Node.js, it doesn't matter, and then compile it to DNA. It's one of the most craziest things. You write a normal program and you have a DNA compiler, compiles your program into DNA, like GC, GPA, these are the amino acids of the DNA, and they have discovered 70% of how the DNA program flow works. So you have things like conditional statements, like if X larger than 5, jump to T or something. And in the DNA they have, if molecule X is present, then jump to location this and encode for this protein. So they discovered some of this. So I can now, we all can now compile into DNA our programs, and there are things like DNA printers. They print out DNA sequences, and then you take this DNA sequence, put it into Escherichia coli. You just take it out of your mouth, it's a small bacteria. You put in a virus that's delivering your DNA. into this organism, and you press enter, and the thing starts living. And really crazy, but some people use it for, if you have oil contamination, you just make a small program that takes oil molecules, splits them into air and carbon, press compile, print it, put it into a bacteria, give it a growth medium, and release it into the oil contamination field. And better be careful, of course, to include a signal. If there's no more oil, kill yourself. Otherwise, I mean, this stuff is really crazy. It's possible, but of course, something goes wrong. You have this mutating nanites, and okay, I'm getting distracted again. This data bank, I really like this PCA principal component analysis. Like I said, you have these star systems, and you try to get them into shape and look from things of. Another cool thing is the ESOMs, the emergent self-organizing maps. This is what a transdimensional background radiation of the universe looks like if you project it into 2 dimensions. Simulated annealing is also cool. You just shake your universe until things fall down. So yeah, that's the basic first prototype. The amplifiers I built, it's very simple technology currently. It's simply a frequency filter, filtering out everything that's not brainwaves. So brainwaves are from 5 to 100 Hertz. Everything else, like if I have the headset on, directly there's a frequency filter, a capacitor, the coil, and then filtering everything out that's not between 1 and 100 Hertz. After this filter there's an amplifier. You can have operation amplifiers or instrumentation amplifiers, those things. They amplify the signal 1,000 to 10,000 times. And then there's silver electrodes, noise filters, amplification. Then the analog digital conversion. It's a thing like you have in sound cards. It's taking analog information and converting it to numbers. So nowadays I can do it with 24 bits, with 30,000 sample rate. So it's better than the average sound card. And what it basically is a specialized sound card for low frequencies, with the filters and the highest quality amplifiers you can get. So if you have a good USB sound card for very expensive for DJs, you can simply take the audio cables and stick them to your forehead and use your high quality sound card, because most sound cards are not optimized for low frequencies. They kind of ignore what is below 20 Hz because it's not hearable sound. And so you can use a very high quality sound card, you can do the same thing with it. What I did is just try to create a low cost specialized sound card for low frequencies, basically bass frequencies, and then analog digital conversion and send it over USB as it used to be. In the last 3 years it was possible to also send it over Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. That's the craziest thing. My new headsets, I included a small chip that's actually a Wi-Fi router, not a client but a router in itself, and you put a small antenna on it, and then I'm quite proud to say every headset is also a wireless community mesh networking hub. So it's in Germany we say Freifunk, which means free transmission, and it's this upcoming thing, the wireless community mesh network. It's no longer everyone. The current normally is just the receiving in our notebooks or in our smartphones. It's receiving, it's acting as a Wi-Fi client. It needs those base stations or access points to connect to the classical client-server model. But you can do this mesh networking. So every receiver is also a sender, and that's possible to reconfigure every network card in your phone or your laptop. Is just a software question. You can reconfigure them to be senders and receiver and do channel hopping, basically to weigh all the channels at the same time, to send everywhere at the same time by being very quickly hopping the channels. And so the latest headsets, they already have an access point on the headset itself, and I can tell you, okay, use your smartphone, connect to the metaverse Wi-Fi, and then on your smartphone receive the brainwaves. But I'm trying to blend this mesh networking also into it, so it's generally a good idea. And that's different technologies. I mean, this is now a museum edition. It's 15 years old, and some guys from the OpenEEG project, they came up with this, the first open source memory amplifiers, very large, and then there was the SMD version, one we came up with, and yes, even newer one, but I don't include it. That's how you can build the headset for low cost. This is a headphone frame. When I took off the headphones, it's for €1. Because cheap headphones, I don't care how much the speakers just have the recyclable frame. And then the hair rings, and then put some Arduino Nano on it. Make the electrodes from silver jewelry. Most which is done by using silver coins. And yeah, you can also include it into your clothes, like there's trend wearable technology. You can make electrodes out of silver wires. They are very small silver threads that are coated in silver, and you can sew with it. So the coolest thing is to include electrodes not as a solid metal, but simply weave them into certain parts of your head or of your shirt, and then you simply have certain threads are silver coated, and that's, if it connects with your sweat, you can have those electrodes anywhere in your body, and so you can do heart and lung measurement, brain measurement, and there's special hardware for it, like the LilyPad specialized Arduino for wearable electronics. The Southpaw, some friend of mine from Noisebridge, the San Francisco hackerspace, he made the Northpaw and Southpaw. You wear it on your hand, transhumanist idea, it has different vibrators from the smartphones, like the things that vibrate, and you put it on your hand or on your ankle, and whenever you're facing north, it starts vibrating. And at different frequencies, when you're facing south, it starts vibrating another frequency. And when you wear this kind of bracelet, after a few days or weeks, you simply become aware, okay, that's where north is, because you sense this new sense. And that's just the beginning of it. Like the military in the United States, they can stream full HD video in your visual cortex if they use neurochips. So basically in the future, the transhumanist, the cyborg, you can extend your senses with all kinds of other information. And I just like to do it in the open source maker community, because I think it's important that not only the military uses this, but try to enable everyone to play around with this technology for a few euros and help shape it, that it is used for the good of humanity. There are various commercial headsets available, also nowadays from a company in San Francisco, Emotive, older prototype, the IBVA. It's a Japanese guy, he's pretty amazing, he's now my master engineer, and he has been doing it for 40 years. It's so amazing. He used to be into high quality audio amplifiers, and then 40 years ago he had this idea, oh, you can make a specialized amplifier for brainwaves, and before there were computers, he used the oscilloscopes to visualize the brainwaves, and the first personal computer from Mac, he programmed it to do visuals like I do, and then he showed me videos measuring brainwaves of Timothy Leary and other faculty, and you could see like he was doing basically the same visuals I was doing, but it was going like this to make one line of the pixels of the Fourier transform. And so his system is always, but it's more high cost. So I think that's, I mean, I have technical details. That's a human diagram of my software API framework, real-time analyzer, signal matrix, and outputting visual information, video OST. So that's the thing I usually like to do. I go to festivals, music festivals, I give to the people, the audience, all those wireless headsets, and then I talk to the DJs and to the musicians and to the VJs and say, hey, I'm going to send you this brainwave signal on port 2342. See as MIDI or OSC, see if you can input into your visualizer software and see what you can do with it. It's usually interesting. Many applications. Self-control the mental state. That's a biggie. So you no longer, I think the potential is so big, so great. Like sometimes people say, today I don't feel creative, I have a writing blockade, I cannot continue my creative project, or I can't really focus today, I take a walk outside, or I can't sleep. And then we are usually slaves of our brain. If it's working well, we can have good times, and if it doesn't, we kind of have to wait. But it can change. In scientific improvement, you can improve your ability to self-regulate the brain. So you can just say, okay, I'm going to go in my creative state now. I'm going to go in my focus state, I'm going to go in my learning state, I'm going to go in my sleep state. And that takes a little bit of training. But what I have definitely done is, when studying for university, do 10 minutes of deep relaxation training, where you do this light therapy, you hear the binaural beats, and it's reacting dynamically to the brain activity. So it's waiting until the brain is following, and then only keeps going down with the frequency. Not simply goes down with the frequency, regarding if you're thinking about your shopping list or your children. It's waiting until the brain follows, and then it's more important. And I used to do this some study for half an hour, then do 5 minutes therapy, and I could go on learning for many hours and even days. But eventually you can keep yourself awake and still be able to process information with this technology, but What I've not been able to remedy is the mana power. So you can stay awake and still process information if you do this light turkey, crazy stuff, but eventually I lose the ability to that creative force. Eventually it's very hard to replenish the creative energy. You still need REM sleep for it. Although there are rumors to be certain meditations where you can visualize certain sequences of images to simulate things. Yeah. Getting too far ahead of myself. You can place electrodes in all kinds of areas. What I've also done is control flying quadrocopters with it. If you put the electrodes on the motor cortex on the top, what I can do is make a fist, or imagine kicking, or kick in the beginning, make a fist, and then you get a very strong response because the physical part of our body is mapped very largely on the brain, because it used to be an important part in our past, moving and running away from the tiger. And so what you can do is, I did with a chimpanzee many years ago. He had a joystick and he had a brain interface, and he had to put a dot onto a cross. Whenever he did this, he got an infusion with sugar. And so in the beginning he moved, but he was actually, the brain interface was hooked up to his motor cortex. And so when he was moving the joystick, his brain would light up and it would be measured, and then moving the dot according to the brain activity, not according to the joystick. But the chimpanzee was thinking it was the joystick, moving the joystick, but it was reacting to his brain impulses. And even the chimpanzee, after a few hours looking for sugar, he eventually stops moving the joystick and just doing it with his mind. And so that's possible with the electrodes I have, which I only put on the head. I'm not going to implant you any electrodes.
Thank you.
It's fascinating, but it still gets information, and not in the basement of makerspace. So I just use it on the scalp, so I cannot say what kind of movement you are doing with your hand, but I can say you are moving your right hand or you're not. So what I've done with the quadrocopter is make a fist and make a kicking move, and then later you can simply imagine making a fist with your right or left hand. You just imagine it, and you still get this impulse. And so with this mechanism you can control the quadrocopter in 2 dimensions, or make music. And also I can do the same thing for the Wernicke's area. Like the American military, they have this for their special forces. They implant a neural chip, and then the commander can think something, and all the soldiers, they hear the voice in their head through Wi-Fi telepathy. But the neurons grow around the chip, and it's hard to take it out again, and it gets inflamed. And currently, but you have higher resolution. But if I put my electrodes on the Wernicke's area, I can simply tell if you're thinking anything or not.
That's one of the big issues I'm sort of picking up here is the resolution of what's going on in the brain. We've got billions of neurons, and the resolution of what we're able to stimulate and also what we're able to measure is very coarse in comparison to the amount of details.
Of course, I'm not saying I'm measuring your consciousness. My technology can only measure the background noise of your general brain activity. I can say you are sleeping, you are awake, you are highly focused, you are relaxed in certain parts of your brain. And this information is already a lot. But of course, with every electrode on the scalp, I'm measuring millions of neurons, so it's only the general activity in the left frontal cortex, for example. If you do mental calculations, like psychology, they always say, subtract 3. It's easy enough that everyone can do it, but hard enough that your brain needs. And I can only say, okay, your left frontal cortex is doing some math, but not more, or it's not doing it, or you're visualizing something. Or I can tell if the music you're hearing is inspiring to you, is getting your brain to be active or not. So, but if you put chips in the neural chips in the brain, the latest thing supposedly they have is this carbon steel silk nanotubes, guns. So they put this thing to your head, and then they have very small carbon nanotubes, very atomic scale carbon molecules aligned very geometrically, with very solid, coated with silk and steel, and they shoot this targeted in the chimpanzee currently, chimpanzee's head, and then they can send those electrodes to an area and they transmit wires. But then I'm consciously not doing this, and I think it's not necessary because I'm developing software and changing my algorithms for the EEG, and as technology improves, the algorithms still work, just they're a lot better. So for me, it's okay to experiment with EEG It has low resolution, but I can still improve the algorithm. And once there's a better brain interface like in Matrix, I'm even not sure if I would implant it, but once it's safe, the same algorithm can be used. But it's a challenging point in neuroscience. We have also the fMRI and various other things which have a very good resolution. They show the blood activity in the brain. So currently we have this interesting challenge. The EEG is giving you a good temporal resolution. So if there are quick changes in your brain activity, I can sample now with 30,000 times per second. I can sample with 24 bits, so it's extremely precise according to the time resolution. So I can see quick changes, but only rough changes. And the other things like fMRI, they can show very precisely where things are happening in your brain, but they have only 1 second or 10 times per second. Or usually only once a second they can take a measuring sample. So we have all these kind of cool ways to measure brain activities, but none is perfect. EEG has a good temporal resolution, the fMRI has a good spatial resolution. Only combined, they can measure the general activity in your brain. And I'm not saying, consciousness is so complex. I can tell you're having alpha waves. So usually, oftentimes when you're meditating, beginning to meditate, you have alpha waves. But it, of course, doesn't necessarily mean if you have alpha waves, you're meditating. So it's completely unknown. So I can train people. Some people come to me and say, okay, I want to train my ability to have more alpha waves. Then they train and they get the ability. I can see this. They can consciously say, okay, I'm going to go into alpha mode, and then their alpha wave frequency increases. But what this means for their subjective experience or for their consciousness, I have no idea. So you can change waves and frequencies in your brain, but of course the phenomenon of consciousness is infinitely more complex. So it's just the beginning of this whole technology. I'm just making sure that the maker community and the DIY citizen science people have the chance to play with this technology in a simple case, mostly because to be aware of this crazy change that's going to happen. Most of you probably have noticed, if you go in a train, you see all those young people constantly looking at these things. They're already plugged into the matrix, basically already cyborgs, looking at this retina displays for hours and hours, and things like this can happen, time today. Suddenly there's a new technology, and over the course of 5 years, everybody is using it, and nobody is really like, what are we doing here? What is going on? All beautiful colors and marketing and sharing pictures, and so I try to inform people what is possible with this coming technology and reflect upon it and decide for yourself how you want to take it. So that's basically, Apple and Google and Sony and Nintendo, they're going to, and the big pharma companies, they're going to very soon say, oh, wear this Euro headset and wear this implant in your heart and whatever. You get a cheaper rate for your contract. There for your insurance, you get a cheaper rate if you wear this, because then if you smoke cigarettes too much, they know, and they're promising that it's already happening. Many of my colleagues, they're selling to the marketing managers, and they're saying you can learn to reach your peak state. And the people will come and will say, wear those headsets, improves your mental ability, it improves your health, it lowers your insurance rate. But what is really happening is they're taking your personal biosignal, brainwave, heart rate information, uploading it to their servers, and selling it to the marketing people. And with Facebook, with your mouse movements, Facebook is tracking your mouse movements, and every click you do at night is recorded forever in Utah, the big data black hole. And that's kind of, okay, your mouse movements on Facebook might be personal at night, but then if they take your biosignals, I'm kind of, want to make people aware, try to be aware what software you're using, maybe use open source firewalls and not blindly trust Google or Mac or Facebook, even if they have the good intentions. It's risky if they upload all the data of all humans, of all their brains, to a central server. Of course, the people are open for manipulation. I'm not thinking the aliens are out there and recording my brainwaves through the HARP project, but if you can understand more about the human mind, but if it's happening and people like us don't know about it, it can be exploited. So,
should we go to general questions now?
Yes.
Okay. So we got about, guys, what we do is let's go for 5 minutes or so of questions, take a quick break, and then get into the workshop. And then you'll have a chance to check with Andreas as well later on. So just general questions as we go here.
Do you think there's a a long-term risk of overstimulating your brain? You said you could go for hours, days, kind of continuing to learn. Like, do you think that your brain could grow weary of that or immune to it?
Yeah, that's like the first experiment I made. I was going to say I connected it the wrong way and was going to stimulate harmony in my hemispheres, brainwave synchronicity. I was thinking, okay, now I'm going to sit down and look at the visuals and meditate, and when I have this harmony in my brain hemisphere, but actually confused the electrodes, set it up the wrong way, so it was actually rewarding me when I had dissonance, or when I had chaos in my mind. But I didn't know, so I thought, okay, everything is cool, and meditate for harmony, and after half an hour I got the worst headache I ever had. And I thought, okay, maybe check your connections here, and I realized you had it set up in the inverse way, like it can be complex. And so I'm telling people, if you get headaches or feel dizzy, stop. You know, of course, if somebody takes cocaine or whatever, or crazy stuff, and keeps doing it, even though he gets headaches, so I'm saying, if you get headaches or if you feel dizzy, stop. Go to the doctor or just stop it. And of course, if somebody were to administer you with chemicals, like in Clockwork Orange, and do your eyes like this, it can be dangerous. But that's why I'm saying, if you have any discomfort, stop using this technology. Go out in nature, drink some water, and stop. Because if you don't, it's your own responsibility. So there are dangers to it, certainly. You can mess up your brain. You can rewire the neural connections really physically for a longer time. So if you were to take psychedelic substances, stay awake for a long time, and go into a sensory deprivation chamber, and I know maybe a few people, but then it's your own responsibility. It can be mind-altering.
Because your brain tells you when you're feeling tired and you need to go and take a rest, so if you're continually telling it that it can stay up longer and it continue working, then over months and years...
I'm saying, look at it for relaxation, look at beautiful visuals, and only do it for 15 minutes. But it's rewiring your brain, so of course it's like nuclear technology. You can launch humanity into a new golden age, or you can destroy the planet and make everyone a zombie.
Do you find it a challenge being a scientist and a creative? Because what you said is you haven't done double-blind studies. Most of this work has been on you, but you're also a scientist, so you know that you have to be able to do that if you're going to extrapolate the data. But you're also creating some interesting outcomes and interesting art. How are you moving this forward? Are you just playing? Are you tinkering? Are you moving down a scientific route, or are you sticking with the creative exploration?
Are you wearing a green badge of health? So
I have no idea what I'm wearing. Green. I'm half and half, perhaps.
So I mean, I have a basis in science, a strong basis in science. So that's important to not go crazy into aliens are measuring my brainwaves. So what I compare it to this, I'm more a visionary now. So and I compare there's a relationship between visionaries and scientists. Like the visionaries, like myself, or we kind of go into the fog. We don't really see what's going on. We just kind of like I usually say the visionaries are going ahead before the scientists, feeling out the fog. So you kind of see there's a little light here, and you kind of go like this, and there's a wall here, and okay, there's a hole here, and you're not really completely seeing the whole picture. There's no detailed resolution. I'm saying as a visionary, I'm feeling out the fog, kind of general direction where things can go to. Like I'm trying to define all the possibilities of a brain-computer interface. What can you do with it? Kind of map it out, open up the space, and then the scientists are following, building solid bricks. So the scientists are putting one solid brick there, and stepping on it, and putting another solid brick in it. I have so much respect for the scientists. Spend 10 years and do basic research, do the same experiment for years and years, thousands of times, and be extremely precise about it. And it's like making a very solid bricks where thousands of people can walk. But I'm kind of going through the swamp, and I have danger like getting sucked into somewhere, going through the swamp and feeling out the fog, and then the scientists actually lay a solid foundation. So it's symbiotic. And I have a high respect for the scientists. I'm crazy dreamer. Some of us get lost, they run around in the fog and might get lost. But then I think it's a symbiotic relationship. And I, as a generalist, try to do the things, but I need the scientists, people who spend decades of their life just measuring a single cluster of 10 neurons for all of their life and making detailed records. Without this, they couldn't be dreaming about the future. And without me, they had no idea in which direction to go. And it's a symbiotic relationship. And so, but I kind of am more creative now and enjoy the visionary dreaming thing. because the science thing is so arduous task. And if you have attention deficit like myself, it's ideally it's symbiotic.
Can't you use this to help you?
Yes, I did so. So the brainwave from 10 years ago, I had high activity, very much high activity in the beta waves. That means being excited and being everywhere. And then at the same time having dream waves, and in the middle nothing. So basically normal brainwaves of normal people, I had almost no activity, only very high frequency and very low frequency at the same time. So it means like being introverted in your own universe and still very active.
But
I improved it.
When people come to you and say, can you help me meditate? Okay, do you get them to sign a non-disclosure thing?
Oh, because I tell them this is experimental psychedelic technology.
So it sounds to me like this is sort of digital hallucination.
Digital alchemy, I call it, techno shame.
And it seems to me that we typically talk about how the law is very slow to catch up with things like the internet, but I mean this is another, quantum leap beyond that.
Yeah.
We have illegal drugs today.
So I'm not a doctor, I'm not a practitioner. I tell people I can't make any promises. I tell them this is art. It's nice for me and my friends. If you are willing to look at the visuals, stop when you have
Is there a risk that someone would come to you and put your
new headset
kit on them, and if it's not wired up right, they could have an adverse reaction and then take you to court?
Yeah, of course, after thousands of people, I had this. Some people, it's their own fault. They take psychedelics like LSD or ketamine.
Are you saying someone's taking you to court?
No, that's not okay. Because...
if imagine someone did take you, what do you imagine would happen?
Well, it would be great. I would be speaking in front of the court and making all those points and push this technology forward. And if I have to...
Before we let Andreas go and meditate, one more question. One at the back there. Thanks.
Scott, just following up on what Richard asked you. You talked a lot about they and them. Talk
Can we hear the question, please?
About they and them and what they're doing and how you cope with them. And what's your relationship with them?
Who was them again?
Who are they? What is your relationship with who? You talk a lot about they're doing this, they can do that, they can do the other.
Well, scientists, philosophers.
What's your relationship with them?
Well, I try to help them.
Okay, but do you have, what sort of contact do you have with them?
I try to talk to everyone who is into this similar research on an artistic or scientific level. And I place the headset there and I tell you, if you want, that's the law thing. I don't say, hey, take this headset, and I don't put it on them. I say, I've got this crazy device here, if you want to experiment. And then make a recording of it, and if somebody puts it on, I had it once happen. A guy took psychedelic substances and listened to certain music and closed his eyes, and he managed to mess up his vision. After he came out of half an hour of the training session, he kept continuing even though he had pain. He didn't tell me. And after he opened his eyes, his vision was all blurred because he abused his visual center. But then it's only temporary. After 10 minutes, he was back to normal. It was only one session. In one session, I think with EEG, nothing bad can happen. From my thousands of people's experience.
Right, we're going to thank